Hello out there. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Drum roll.
I'm like I'm like in my yeah, like I had my old, rave days. No, I didn't. Surprisingly enough, but if I did, I would have been as geeky looking as I am right now. But that's why I didn't go. So, but anyway, welcome to Drop the Beat, our new contest, and this is going to be so much fun. Really, it's a challenge, right? Because it's a challenge for all of you to work with our beat sheets, which we'll be getting into in just a moment. So I know we already have people asking, how do I get involved? This sounds really fun. We'll get to all that. Let's see where everybody's from. Let's see. We've got Hawaii, South Carolina, Atlanta, Tennessee, Texas, the UK, Seattle, Chicago. Let's get some likes on the video, people. I like how you think over there. Yes, please like, subscribe, hit the bell. There'll be lots of great content coming for you this month involving Drop the Beat. And of course, we have NaNoWriMo coming soon, and we're going to have some great stuff for that. So you're not going to want to miss out on that. If you have noticed, though, I'm a little husky today. My voice is a little gone. It doesn't hurt, though. It's not a sore throat, but just so you know.
He's been training. He's been training to sing in our band. You see.
That's what it is, it was that all-nighter at the concert. I just blew my voice out. I'm sorry. But but welcome. All right, so Gareth, I love your look today. Otto is totally in the groove of things. I'm digging that. What is this drop the beat challenge? Do you want to give the audience a little bit of insight into this?
Absolutely. Yes, I am in full-on Motley Crue attire today, and yeah, the drop the beat challenge. Well, we thought, we've had challenges based on writing full stories. We've had, the short story challenge. We've done Destination Unknown. All of these things that really got into formulating and completing something. And we thought, hey, why don't we try stripping things way back to concepts, initial ideas of stories that shine from the beginning, because some people like to plan things and just kind of flesh out ideas properly. So it brought us to, well, what's the thing? Story beats.
Yes.
What's any story constructed of? Beats.
Oot,
Now,
oot, oot.
a lot of you may be familiar with beat sheets. A lot of you may not. They're pretty widely used between both novelists and screenwriters. Whenever I first came across a beat sheet, obviously it was with screenwriting. I've never been a huge user of them until now. Obviously, getting into the challenge, into the swing of things. But yeah, probably the most popular one I guess people have always heard of is the Save the Cat beat
Yep.
sheet, which was initially a screenwriting one.
Yep.
And it has its own sort of separate beats that you can plan out. Now, what is a story beat? Essentially, a moment in time in the story that has, a turning point, something to say, an actual plot point that happens.
Mhm.
And it can be quite challenging to create a beat sheet because there's a lot that goes on in between those beats.
Mhm.
You're basically mapping out for yourself what's happening, well, not just what's happening, but why it's happening. Why does it matter? And this is the
Yep.
good thing about using them, I find, is that they help you remove fluff when you
Yep.
realize that some of the scenes that you really wanted to get in there don't fit in there really. And why do they not fit in there? Because they're not really doing anything. It can help you find that. So
Yeah, exactly.
pay attention to that throughout. And we dug in and thought through a lot of our own writing, and we're just like, okay, well, let's create an AutoCrit beat sheet, find a way that maps out nicely for us, and then we'll have everybody join in as a group. And we'll give you 2 weeks as a challenge. Now, we will go over today why it's 2 weeks long, because I'm sure I hear some people going, Gareth, why 2 weeks when it's just filling in a bunch of boxes on a
I
sheet?
know. It's like what? What is it going to be? Like 500 words? You could crank that out in like 20 minutes. I know all of you out there.
And it's like, yeah, I could spend 25 minutes on social media and write more boxes than that.
That's true.
And while that may be true, the core really is that this is a challenge and there's going to be prizes. So yes, everybody who has registered. Do we have the link loaded up there, Daniel? Let me
Uh,
see.
I do
I do
not.
not.
But while you're loading that up, I have a question here from so I'll go ahead and bring this up. Somebody's pointing out this is a challenge for pantsers. You know what? I will say that is one great thing about these challenges is because we do have people that I know are in the audience that they love to outline, they love to plan, they love to think about everything they're going to write before they get started. And then we have a lot of people, probably more, that just like to fly by the seat of their pants. They just like to come up with a concept and go with it. And the point of this exercise is not to tell you to stop doing that. However, this is a great challenge just to see what it's like to step into that mindset a little bit and outline. And what I will also say is you may not find this to be a great tool before you write, but what you may find is this is a great tool for your story edit because sometime with pantsers, what I find helpful when talking to them because they get to the end of their story and they're like, okay, I kind of knew what happened, but I was just I was running by the seat of my pants, right? So they get to the end, but for a developmental edit at that point, it's kind of good to go back and then you could fill in all those points, so you're kind of outlining reversed, right? But it's a great sheet so you can see, oh, this is maybe a scene I'm missing, or maybe I'm not setting up for this. So do not fear if you are a planner or a pantser. This is going to be a great challenge for you either way, at least in my opinion.
It will be. And like Daniel said, even if you are not used to planning, you can take this not so much as a full-on story plan, because like I said, there's lots that goes on between the lines, between the boxes, so to speak,
Yes.
on a beat sheet. So there's still a lot more that you are free to, move around with. But you're just looking at what's going on technically at the core story points. And doing this ahead of time, or even with something that you have already written, can help you see where it's thematically strongest, where you're actually delivering what needs to be done, especially in terms of a character arc too. So while we talk about story beats, we'll also talk about character beats. But we'll get to that shortly.
Yes.
The main thing about the challenge is, now that I have the banner up here, I can actually show it. This is our link. If you have not yet registered, AutoCrit.com/drop the beat challenge with little dashes in between the words there. Drop dash the dash beat dash challenge. And you can register for it. As long as you are registered, you're going to be in the running to win some spot prizes. We're keeping them under wraps at the minute. Some are really cool and kind of on theme for you writers out there, which are going to be.
Well, you get to win like beets, like roasted beets. I sure hope so.
Well,
Like a can of pickled beets.
I think we
I don't
tried
think
that.
so. I don't think so. I'm just,
I'm going to say I think we did try behind the scenes to find some BEET related prizes, but couldn't really decide on anything. However, some of the prizes that we will be giving away are going to be physical things too, so we'll have them shipped out to you. You'll have nice little cool mementos and some other bits and bobs. However, there will be a grand prize. We will reveal that later on as well, because we'll drop in with you all midway through the challenge. We'll drop in with you all towards the end, obviously, to do our prize draw, and there will be a winner. Now, in the second week of the challenge, as we approach October 15th, I believe we will open for submissions from October 13th. We'll send everybody who's registered an email with a link to the form to upload your form if you want to be in the running. And this is why today's stream is quite important for everyone, because this is going to be jury judged. Just like our short story challenge was. And we're going to look through all of the beat sheets that have been uploaded and as a panel, figure out the winner that represents the strongest story that we can see right there, and that incorporates multiple things from the plot. Obviously, how the plot is moving. Is it interesting? Is there anything unique about it? But also character growth. So when we look throughout that beat sheet, is this something that an agent or an executive at a production company would look at and go, yeah, I want to read this because this actual sheet is telling me something that really, really hooks me. And it's got really great ideas built into it. Now, the reason that this is a challenge and that we have given you 2 weeks to do that is you probably noticed that all the boxes on these sheets are little tiny things. You have a bullet point, more or less, a couple of notes for each sheet, for each box, sorry. Mm-hmm. And getting that into a form where you can look at it and go, that's something that really does grip me, is a challenge. It's tough. It's going to be tough. It is. So if you want to be in the running for that, well, take the 2 weeks and really drill it down. So today, Daniel and I are actually going to walk through the sheet show each of the boxes on it, because if you are unfamiliar with beat sheets, and of course everybody here is probably going to be unfamiliar with our particular beat sheet and what it all means because it's new,
Yep.
we'll explain what everything is on there. And I also have an example of my own. Daniel, you might have a couple of examples of yours, but I have
do.
something that I have been working on. Started doing it just yesterday, and I will give you a little advanced spoiler. I'm not happy with it. It's not 100% yet, and I'm going to explain why I'm not happy with it and what needs to be better. So hopefully that gives everybody some perspective on what we're looking for.
Well, if we get to my example, I actually went through something that already existed just to show what it would have looked like. So I'm very happy with the story because I didn't write it.
You get saved and I get laid bare. Oh
Yeah,
well.
exactly.
So
Sneaky, sneaky, sneaky.
I'll let Daniel take it, but before we do, one more reminder that yes, taking part in the challenge, if you want to be in the running in the prize draw for spot prizes or to upload and take part with the uploading your beat sheet and to win the grand prize, autocrit.com/drop-the-beat challenge, as you can see on screen with little dashes there. Whenever the stream is done, we'll also put that in the description on the video so you can click it. And we're also putting together a written blog that you can go over to as well to see the directions and everything about beat sheets. So all you need to know about beat sheets. So that will be up soon as well. So Daniel.
Yeah, and I
Why don't
will
you take it away?
say, as we go through the points too, these points are tools, and so as you're filling out, it's to hit those marks. But this is not like some sort of exact science, as you'll see as we go through. There's nuance to these points, so I wouldn't overly obsess over making sure every point fits the bullet point exactly. Like I know some people might be like, well, does this really qualify as this and this? I wouldn't necessarily go down that path. You'll probably find yourself just running around in circles. The point is to use it as a tool in order to get all those major points across. So I just wanted to say
Absolutely.
that as a little caveat before we get started. All right. So we begin with Act 1. And I think I'm going to make myself a little bit smaller here. Okay. Act 1. So the beat sheet that we have for you is divided up into 3 acts. It's pretty standard sort of film format, although writers in fiction use it as well. So the opening image, setting the mood. So, this is something that is a common thing to do. And it really helps establish the tone of the piece, what the themes might be. I have some examples here, Back to the Future, starting with all those clocks in Doc Brown's office. Iron Man, he started off in the middle of the desert and he's kind of a man to himself. And then you have like the Lion King with the Pride Rock, which is going to be the main focal point is, who is the king of that kingdom. And then just a more subtle example, I have Green Gables here, Anne of Green Gables, which is the setting starts out and you just get a sense of the town, of the place, of the the location where it is, because that's going to take an important role in the story. In terms of opening, what do you think is a good idea to look out for, Gareth, in making sure you're
Yeah,
doing this right?
with your opening image, this setting the mood is really think of it as, if you're thinking in cinematic terms, your first shot, your opening
Mhm.
shot, and that does directly translate to the written form as well, narrative
It
prose.
does.
The purpose here really is to set the mood. And I think as much as you can, try to make sure that in your opening, or as close to your opening as possible, you're sending a strong signal, that promise that we talk about, to your reader about the story's genre and the overall
Mhm.
tone of it.
Yep.
What am I in for here? A couple of examples. Say I'm reading Stuart McBride's A Song for the Dying at the moment, and that's a pretty grim thriller. And the first thing that it opens with is a couple of paramedics in dark woods that have been called out, and they find the victim of a serial killer. So the opening itself is very, very grim, but also sparkling with kind of Scottish wit between the banter between the two characters. Something as well, for example, Adam Neville's The Ritual, opening line of that. I can't recall it exactly, but it's something like on the third day, they accepted they were completely lost.
Yep.
It opens with it's a very grim tones. These guys are lost in the Scandinavian wilderness, and things are already from the beginning very tense.
Yeah, so speaking to that point, Bruce was talking about a strong, catchy opening line. Yeah, the point is not necessarily, though, just to get somebody's attention. Obviously, that's always great. But beyond that, to indicate the promise to the reader, like Gareth was saying, like what is this? What is the kind of story we're doing? What is the tone of it? What is, it's almost like that opening line on like a dating ad. It's like it gives you the idea of the kind of person that you're going to be spending time with. All right, so let's move on to the glimpse at the theme of the story. And this is often uh, stated, or it's by a character, or it's just you starting to put those pieces in place as to what's the bigger thing in play. Like, what is the story ultimately going to be about? So, like, I'm using some movie examples here. Back to the Future, you have a character that immediately says, if you could put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything. It kind of gets into a theme, but also the relationship of the parents and Marty. And then Lion King, of course, they have that image where they're on the mountain and Mufasa says, one day I'm going to die and one day you're going to take over as king. And obviously, that's the big theme of that story is your place in the greater scheme of life.
Indeed, yeah, this is a very early moment. That is, it's just a single moment as this beat. It's not necessarily. You see, some beats are going to be a scene or multiple scenes long. It could be multiple chapters to represent a single beat. Something like this, though, the glimpse at theme is usually just a very quick moment.
Mhm,
That indicates what's going on under the surface. What's the
mhm.
story actually about? What's the hero's journey going to be about? Are you talking about grief? Is it an issue of class? Is it about coming of age? Is it actually going to be a tale of vengeance and what that can do to you and that kind of thing? The range is huge. Pretty much anything that you can be trying to say with the story. I think the key to this one, to really making this work early on, is not to be preachy with it. You don't want to be completely on the nose, like, hey, here's what the story's about.
Right.
It's a very subtle, almost subconscious nod to a couple of things. Now, number one, the theme, I think, ties directly into your main character quite often. The theme will be revolving around them, and it's whatever it is that the natural flaw is, or something that's killing them right now, that is the thing they're going to need to overcome to succeed in the story. And you're hinting at that very early. There's a little
Yep.
hint of, if you don't, well, this thing about you is what is actually at the core of this. No matter what the rest of the plot is actually about, it could be an alien invasion and everything, but
Right.
ultimately the theme is what's happening inside that person.
Right. Often it reflects in the secondary stories, but yeah, it has to do with the character growth, not necessarily like the MacGuffin or what the plot is about. All right, so then we have setting the status quo, where we see, more or less where things are at in the person's life. So just the three examples I have here: Iron Man, it immediately establishes the status quo as he doesn't really work with anybody. He's his own person. The other person has to even accept his award. Little Mermaid, she doesn't want to show up to her music rehearsal. She's too busy exploring. Back to the Future, Marty is hanging out with Doc. He's kind of a nerd. It's just establishing kind of what's normal for the characters so that you can see them have that growth, right? And so you can compare it to what they will become later.
Yeah, this is one that can be multiple scenes long as well.
Mhm.
You're setting up the standard, how the world is for your characters right now. I think one thing to keep in mind too, depending on the story, is the status quo doesn't have to be good. A lot of people think, well, over the course of a story arc, they're going to start in a good place, then something bad's going to happen, and then
Yep.
they're going to have to come back to a good place from that something
Right.
bad. Not necessarily. Things could start really bad and get worse,
Yep.
or things could start really bad and get a bit better,
Right.
and then just get better from there. You don't really
It's
know.
true.
It's what fits for the story. For example, I mentioned Adam Neville's The Ritual. The opening line, it starts, those guys are in a very bad spot. They're lost in the wilderness, and things only get worse.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's so true. It's just establishing that starting point for the character. And I would say too, depending on what the starting point is, probably will vary how long you spend and how many scenes you need. Because for example, if this is a lot of world building of a really cool universe that we don't usually live in, it's probably going to take more time because it's interesting. Whereas if it's just, they go every day to their work and they have a cup of coffee and it's boring, well, you're obviously not going to spend a lot of time establishing that because it's boring. You're going to go quick and just get it out of the way just so you get an idea of it. For sure. Then we have the inciting incident, the call to adventure. This one is probably one that most people can identify easily because this is really where the story gets started. It's where the character is beckoned on their adventure. You know, villains establish plans. Iron Man blows up. The ring is discovered. Even something more minor. I have the Anne of Green Gables example because it's not quite as action packed, but the fact that Anne is not a boy is that big inciting incident because they expected a boy, but they have a girl instead, and then they have to cope with the situation.
Yeah, I can't back that up much more. The inciting incident is what it is. I think most of us know that this is
Pretty
the
straightforward.
beat or the moment, the scene where the world starts to change.
Hmm.
Usually, depending on the setup of your story, it'll be the first time the villain actually encroaches into the world of your main character as something changes. But that's not necessarily the case. It's simply the status quo. Something invades the status quo.
Yep. All right. Next, we have the refusal of the call. So this is where the main character has that inciting incident and then they have an opportunity to get involved in the story. And often their initial inclination is to basically not want to. And the reason why is either the reason why for the purposes of the author is because we want to clue into the audience that involving themselves in this adventure is a big deal. And if somebody just said, "Oh yeah, cool," it's just like getting coffee from the store or something, then that's not that big of a deal. Whereas if it's something they have to consider, then that means it's a big deal. Now, the refusal can sometimes be a matter of seconds. Like, for example, maybe Gareth will disagree, but in my opinion, the refusal of the call in Lord of the Rings is Frodo gets the ring and immediately he says, "Well, I don't want this. Why don't you do it, Gandalf?" And the Gandalf's like, "Well, no, I can't do it." And it's just a very quick moment, but that moment lets you know that the gravity of taking it on is something with weight. It's not just something that Frodo would be like, "Oh yeah, cool, that sounds like a good idea."
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the refusals can be big or they can be small. It all depends on what your story demands. I think the great thing for refusals, they, well, number one, help to humanize characters because a lot of the thing that's happening here is this thing has encroached on the comfort of my life. No matter whether my life is a bit sucky right now, it's still what it is.
Yep.
It's established. It's safe, and
Right.
as humans, we want to cling to that. We're not going to go into this rocky ground unnecessarily. So the instinct is to just say, no, I'm not going to deal with this. So it's a human response. It's natural. And that's good to show in your characters because it helps them be more rounded.
Yep.
And then it helps you justify as well as the author why they can't say no. There has to be stakes here. So it helps you make the stakes clear. Why are they staying
Right.
involved? Well, because of XXX. But refusal of the call can be very simple. It doesn't need to be a huge, big thing. Even like a romantic comedy, it could be, dude, she's way out of my league. I'm
Hmm.
not going to go there. That's it. But then the
Yep.
romance kicks off from there. The comedy starts and the romance starts. So very
Yep.
simple. So it depends on what your story is.
Right. Yeah, like it is just about establishing the stakes of the character, why they would do it and why they wouldn't, and just getting that out there. Which, if the stakes are low, then like you said, it can be a more minor thing. Low at that point, it doesn't because not everything starts at super high stakes, but sometimes it does. Like I think the Lord of the Rings example is a pretty good one where Frodo immediately has a sense of the gravity of what he's going to do. It still escalates, but you have that weight pretty fast. And so it's a little bit of a stronger, well, no, I'm not going to do this, kind of moment.
That's
Uh,
right. So it really sets up the ring as well as something. Just the fact that it's that feeling
yeah,
is
just
part
something
of
to
it.
be scared of. Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
And
All
before we
right.
move on, I'm just going to catch a question here from David. Are we looking for
Oh,
just one or
yes.
two sentences for each box? Yes. There's two versions of the file you can download. There's a printable one if you like to do your scribbling in with pen by hand. You can print it out, or we have an editable version that you can just type directly in the PDF. Obviously, I think a lot of people find that easier. But you're going to be restricted by space, so you will probably only fit one or two sentences, maybe three. You'll see in my sheet when we start looking through it, I summarize a little bit, use some abbreviations, but you can still get the point.
Somebody mentioned, what about the heroine's journey? Well, obviously, these beats work. Doesn't matter who the protagonist is, it could even work for an inanimate object if that is the protagonist of your story, for sure. Um, it does not matter.
Like the film Rubber, which is a killer
Oh,
car
rubber! I love that
tire.
reference. That's hilarious. Okay, all right, you just got me. Question to the new world. So this is pretty straightforward. I think this is where the main character has decided to go off into the new world, right? Which is not necessarily a change of scenery, although most of the time it is because just thematically it's done. But sometimes it's just a matter of, they've decided to, go on that first date, or they've decided to take that job, or whatever. It doesn't have to be as dramatic as leaving the planet like in Star Wars, or leaving the Shire as in Lord of the Rings. But this is that part of the main character's journey where they are deciding to involve themselves in the story, at least for the time being.
Yeah, so what you want to see in this beat really is the decision being made. Yes, I'm going to go for it.
Right.
For the most consistent, if it's, this is why it's a bit of a challenge to sort of fit it into those boxes there too, is that glancing over that box or that beat, you want to have an understanding of the reason why. It's what is it that has made them make the decision that yes, they're going to stick, with this thing.
Yeah, exactly. And to the point, the audience needs to have a sense of, why they're off in the first place. Obviously, there's something at stake driving them forward, maybe something to be fearful about, but they're going to do it anyway, and they're doing all of that at the same time. Somebody's asking, can the protagonist be a group of people instead of one person? I would say that technically, I guess, yes. However, I would say that's super rare in my opinion. I would say even in ensemble pieces, you will generally find there is one character that's actually driving the action. Because if it's multiple people, then you still have a decision maker, you still have somebody that tends to be the instigator. It's very rare that you're going to have a group of people where they're all kind of colluding. That would, I suppose, like in sci-fi you could have something like the Borg or something where they maybe share some sort of collective consciousness, but unless they're sharing a collective consciousness, I think you're going to have a sole person that is really driving it forward for mechanical purposes. What do you think, Gareth?
Yeah, it can be strange. I think even in ensembles, one person can kind of end up leading the pack, so to speak. But that's maybe a side effect of just character differentiation. You'll obviously have one who's a bit more headstrong than everybody else.
Right.
Although I see no problem with going through a story, planning the beats with an ensemble. I think it would just be very difficult to, a lot more difficult than dealing with a smaller
Hmm.
cast. Well, that's not necessarily a smaller cast, because let's think about heist stories.
Yep.
They involve an ensemble. They're the team, but there's almost always one ringleader
Hmm.
who's bringing everybody together.
And they
They
usually
are the
have the
driving
thing
force.
that's most at stake too. Usually there's one
Yeah.
character that it really matters for. Like I'm thinking of Inception, which is a great heist story with lots of characters. And it's really about, Cobb's stakes of trying to see his family throughout, even though there's other people that are highly involved.
Yeah, so I
So
would say try it out. If you have ideas for a group of characters, try it out. I think as you start to fill in and imagine the story arc going through, you may actually find this main protagonist kind of in your mind coming to the fore. It'll help develop the story for you, so you may just get a stronger grasp on where you're going with it there. So by all means, yeah.
all right. So yeah, so this is a pretty obvious thing that happens in film. If you get stuck on this, because this is where the characters make a big decision. Marty ends up back in 1955. Milan decides to cut her hair. Iron Man decides to leave the cave as Iron Man. Somebody decides to leave the Pride Lands. The break from Act One to Act Two is pretty is very clear in film most of the time. I'm not saying it's not in literature, but it's certainly easy to tell in film. So if you get stuck, just look there. All right, so now we're in Act Two. The B story breeds. Okay, this one might seem a little more complicated, Gareth. What do you mean by B story?
The B story can mean a couple of things.
Okay.
The easiest one to jump into is a subplot of some kind. This is the point where we're going to see a subplot coming to the fore, usually involving a side character. So subplots don't necessarily have to involve the main character. However, they will intertwine with the overall plot. So they're going to come back around and be more relevant when they resolve. However, but the reason for this, because I know we end up having questions about, well, are subplots necessary? Why do I need subplots? So do I have to? The answer to that really is no, you don't. They're not necessary for every single story. However, what they do help with is the sagging, that dreaded sagging middle, quote unquote, where if your story to you was so exciting because of the concept, you may get into Act 2 and realize that you're running on concept, not story, and there's not enough of it to fill out a full second act that's meaningful without fluff. If that appears to be happening, subplots could be your savior to save you having to, writing 30,000 words that you're just going to have to delete. The good thing with subplots too is that they are their own little mini arcs. So you get the opportunity to step aside with some of your more important side characters and show more about them, explore them, give them their own motivations, give them their own story and challenge to resolve that then wraps back around into the main. And by the time they come back around into the main, because of what they've been through and what they've resolved, they're in a stronger position to help the protagonist. So it all comes together in the end like that. So the B story breathes. This is in relation to subplots mostly. However, if you don't have any subplots, you can also consider this the arrival or the appearance of a side character, a major side character. This is where they become known and they're going to be part of it all. So you don't necessarily have to consider that a full subplot if you don't want to.
Yep. And back to B story. Yeah, I would say the most common B stories that you tend to see. I mean, I don't know statistics on this, but just observation are relationships. Usually, and not even romantic. It could be all kinds of relationships. People develop a friendship, or they develop a romance, or things like that. And often this gives insight to the main character because it shows you how they interact beyond just what the story requirements are. So it can be helpful from that standpoint. The other one that I tend to see a lot is a side mystery that's designed a little bit to distract you from the lack of progress that the antagonist or the big threat is doing. But again, if it's done well, it usually gives you insight into the main character, or it allows the main character to learn something through the process that will help them against the major obstacle or antagonist. All right, so challenges mount. This is probably pretty obvious. This is
It's about a horse.
obstacles. Yes, obstacles start appearing because there were stakes. They entered this crazy new world knowing that there was danger, and this is where you start to throw some danger at them. Obviously, you're going to escalate. You can't throw. You're not going to dial it up to an 11 just yet, but you're going to either have them face off against the antagonist or a good analog of the antagonist or something to prepare them like a mini boss, as it were. This is where you start to doubt how and then not necessarily doubt if the protagonist is going to pull it off, because most of the time there's a lot of genres where you're pretty sure the protagonist will pull it off, but this is where you start to wonder how they're going to do it. Are they really capable of doing it in the way they set out to do? You start to look for twists that the author might be throwing your way, things like that.
Yeah, there's all sorts can go into this. As I said, challenges mount just makes me think of the scene in Conan where Arnold Schwarzenegger punches a horse. But the obstacles that are coming up here, this is your series of obstacles. They can be, I think, like Daniel said, they're a direct consequence of the villain coming in. It's like, hey, it's me. You're gonna have to do something that I've put in your way, or just other issues that are standing in the way of the journey that your hero is trying to take. It can be something simple like bureaucracy, or they don't have a ticket to the party and they got to get one, but they're exclusive. All sorts of things can come in here. But what's really important about this is that as they're overcoming these challenges, we're seeing hints of growth. We're seeing them make choices, whether good or bad. Some should be bad, that are reflecting who they are, or at least as well who they're becoming.
Exactly. All right, so moving on. Yes, so challenges mount film again. Pretty obvious. Things start to go wrong. Let's go to the midpoint where we start to raise the stakes. If you think of like that tension arc, right? This is where maybe they've reached their peak of, hey, this new adventure wasn't so bad, to where it tends to go much more downhill. They start to have many more failures. The antagonist looks worse and worse, things like that. Perhaps there's a twist often in a midpoint where you really realize it's so much worse than you thought. It's like, oh, you thought it was this bad. Well, actually, it's this bad. And maybe they wouldn't have made that choice had they known, but now they're in too deep.
Yeah, there's multiple ways to think about this as well. The midpoint is usually going to be, the clock starts ticking faster. Usually some kind of twist in there, maybe. And again, the twisting, it doesn't have to be negative, is something to keep in mind here, depending
That's
on your
true.
story.
That's a good
Um,
point.
it could be, obviously there's betrayal. There's, haha, I've
Mhm.
been against you all along. And the bomb will now explode in 20 minutes, not 3 hours. And all of a sudden, all of that, the generic ways to really get things moving. But on a positive way, like in a romance story, for example, this could be the point where the character, your main character, gets the kiss, or at least gets a signal that, yes, the love interest is interested in them.
Right.
And then the stakes are raised now, because now they see what they can have and they could get the dream, but now they're going to, after this, dramatically, then the chances start to slip away. So that's what keeps us invested.
Yeah, it's a good point. Somebody said the midpoint is often the shift from reaction to action. Yeah, it does tend to happen around here where um, the main character starts to get maybe more footing. Although I think that often happens a little bit later, but it starts to move in that direction. Yeah, where the main character starts to be more active against the antagonist. But to Gareth's point, like this could be, the twist could be like, well, you didn't know it, but you actually have magical powers. But like he says, that of course would raise the stakes because that means, well, now they have more responsibility because they have these powers, or who knows, maybe they're more of a target. But it wasn't like a negative thing that they got it. So you can raise the stakes in multiple ways for sure.
We have a quick question from Jeremy. Does the structure of the beat sheet change if it ends in tragedy? It does not. Quick
Nope.
answer.
Yes. No. Yeah, we'll get to that because that's all based on how you resolve things, and you can resolve things with failure because it's still an endpoint for the main character, right? If they're overly succumbing to some fatal flaw, well, that's the resolution of all of their actions along the story. All right, the villain adds pressure. Yes, which is pretty straightforward again. Um, pressure. So how do they do this well? What's a good way of making the villain add pressure?
Depends what the villain does. This really is, it's just continuing the series of obstacles.
Yep,
However, the villain is going to be more overt and more direct.
heightening
If
that
if
grip.
if you remember back in the previous beats when they were challenging horses, the obstacles that they were overcoming there could be various things. It can simply be the nature of the world that they're trying to operate in that's in the way. However, when we get to this point, we're seeing the villain become more visible. They are more involved or more directly involved in what's being put in front of your protagonist.
I like this. The person's like the villain is student loan debt. But if that was the situation, you would at this point have a time limit probably, right? It's like, or maybe now they're starting to what do? They start taking some of your money from your workplace, right? So, yeah, you could still do it even with a concept like that, right? Because you'd
It's
have a
like now,
loan officer.
debt collectors are at your door.
Yeah, right.
We see in some sheets,
Or
I think.
depending on how crazy, if you go more of a Stephen King, I'm thinking of like Quitters Inc. It's like, they're
Yeah, they're gonna
armed and they're like
cut your
menacing.
fingers off.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
It's in some other beat sheets. I think in the Sea of the Cat one, they refer to a beat similar to this as it's something like the goons. The villain sends in the goons or something like that.
Bad guys close
Um,
in, I think.
the bad guys close in. That's the one.
Yeah.
So something like that as well. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
Quitters Inc. They're going to come in and cut your fingers off for smoking.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, one thing to keep in mind here too, as well, is you want to keep a bit of a dichotomy as to what's been happening. So if things have been going pretty positively before, these obstacles that the villain puts in there are really going to be heavy work for your main character. Probably they're likely to fail at least one of them because things get worse. In the other side of that, if you have, unless you want to be seriously bleak in what the story is saying, if your protagonist has been just knocked around pillar to post, failing everything and really struggling up until this point in the story, well, maybe this is where the villain steps in and tries to follow up there and say, I'll hit you when you're down, but they overcome them.
Yeah.
They're able to push them back.
Right.
So think about that.
Hmm. Well, you can have like a minor fail, because obviously you can't resolve everything, right? But you can have a little victory on the way to that for sure. Yeah. Because it's not, they have to be learning enough information to eventually defeat the villain at some point, so they don't necessarily start completely clueless and then, Or if they do, you might run the risk of it seeming a little convenient at the end if all of a sudden they become master at whatever it is they need to do in order to overcome the villain at the end, right? B Story Blowout. It sounds like it's on sale. What happened? Why are we discounting the B Story now?
We lost our tires.
Yeah, right.
That's this one.
75% off right now.
Very simple one here. Bring the subplot back in and resolve. You're weaving your subplots back into the main plot and resolving their arcs. So simple.
Yeah, and often too, this is where you're using the B story to kind of knock a little bit into the character. Like I'm thinking of The Lion King, where part of the situation that's going to happen where Simba feels very hopeless is that the B story, which is his romance with Nala, kind of goes sideways at this point too, to where he really doesn't have a lot of anything. So I would say in a lot of relationship stories where the relationship is the B plot, the B plot is resolved kind of poorly at this point because you're really trying to knock out all those crutches so that by the time the protagonist gets to the end, they really have to rise from the ashes. Depending on how epic of a story you want to tell, Lion King is very much a classic sort of myth, quest sort of story. But that brings us to disaster. Yes, where things just look horrifically bleak for our protagonists, don't they?
They do. It all goes wrong. So this is a pretty much a single scene beat. Something really really bad happens. A lot of the time you'll see this happening as part of a false climax, where your characters, I've said this before, breaking down story arcs, they think they've got the answer. So they press the button, they pull the chain, and they say, "I've got the answer. It's time for the final fight." And they discover that they did not have the answer. They lose very, very badly. So it's in the name: disaster. It all goes wrong.
It all goes wrong. I will say this is something where, from a story beat perspective, especially when you're preparing that beat sheet, but I think authors do this too when they're pantsing, is often they get to this point and they know they're like, oh, okay, we're about 2/3 in. So, or, a little bit later than that. And they're like, it's got to go really bad now. And then it's almost like the equivalent of a Deus Machina where you make a thing just to solve your ending, but you make this thing just to make things get really bad. So don't do that. But for the purposes of the story sheet, you can work around that, right? So if you get to the disaster point and you're like, wow, I haven't really raised the stakes enough and I really want to do something awful, well, you can do that and then you can go back and then you can set up for that so that way it doesn't come from left field, which is a helpful reason to use story beats, because I can't tell you how many times I've read books from people, not like published, but people working on stuff, and you get to this point and it's like all of a sudden everybody hates them for no reason and all these things go on because they know that they need to get there, right? And it's like, so everybody in this world is just a jerk for no reason, just so I feel bad for this person for a few seconds. Like, come on. It's just, yeah, don't do that. It's just as bad as making a convenient ending, in my opinion, is making a convenient bad. I feel too, though, like TV writing can do this sometimes. When you have television shows that are like those kind of formulaic ones, is you just get to the point, it's like, oh, okay, they just had to throw in those twists in order to raise the stakes, and it's awfully convenient.
They infuriate me because it's always the reason that it happens is that people simply will not talk straight with each other.
Well, that's the romance problem, yeah.
It absolutely drives me mad.
The problem with the romance comedies is disaster is often just there was an awkward situation that if people just said something, it would be fine. And that's all that it takes to resolve it is they have to have a conversation, but then they have to like be in misery and you're just like, yeah, it's not my favorite. I prefer romance comedies that do a better job at what the disaster is, which can be done.
Yeah.
But this is where you have the despair, but you have the rally. You have the person pulling themselves from the depths of despair and rallying to get involved in the story again. They got to shake off the dust or whatever and decide, well, it may seem hopeless, but if I don't do anything, then I'm already dead anyway. So I might as well put in a good effort.
Yeah, this part involves an engagement with the thematic lesson as well. Remember, in the beginning, we were saying about how the theme ties into what your character needs to resolve in themselves to become victorious. This is the point where they recognize that, and they can see things with more clarity. And whenever they do, they rally. They turn around and go, "Wait, I can actually do this."
Yeah.
Now, as well, there's many ways you can approach this, the despair and rally, because as much as people can despair, you can have it that they actually do give up and they go back to the early life. However, that will not work. When they go back there, they realize that they can't remain part of that world anymore. Too much has changed. This is even in one of the, go back to the heist thing where the whole crew breaks up after the disaster, and it's not going to work. But then they're all sitting in a montage at home or in their respective places, drowning their sorrows in alcohol and hating themselves, and then they rally. It's like we can't let this go.
Yeah.
So something makes them make the decision that no, we've got to see it through, because going back to the previous life is not going to work.
Yep. The person gives up music forever, and then you're like walking down the street and they hear a street musician. They're like, yeah, I guess I still like music. And then they go and then they
That's
get a
when
record
they
deal.
join in with the street musician out of the blue, and then the two of them are rocking it, and the love pours out, and that's the moment.
And it goes viral, and then the whole problem is solved. But yeah, no, it's to Garrett's point. Yeah, tying it into the theme is really where it's gonna feel cohesive, because when you have what the character needs to change about themselves directly affecting a decision they have to make, well, now it's all nesting in quite well, for sure. The power of resolve. This one's a little more abstract, Gareth. What are you getting at with this one?
Now, this is the transition into Act 3. Basically, rallying. Everybody gets together and goes for it.
Excuse me.
Throat acting up.
Yeah, a little bit.
So yes, with the power of resolve.
because this is somebody was mentioning it earlier. And while I do think at the midpoint often the protagonist starts to get more active, this is definitely when, no questions asked, the protagonist is in charge. They are moving towards what they want. They have a pretty good idea of how to do it. That doesn't mean that something won't come up. We'll get to that in a moment. But at this point, they have the resolve to do it. And sometimes the confidence, but certainly the resolve. They're going to try to get it done, whatever it is.
Yes, this particular beat, it's following on from the end of the rally, is the decision to take action. They're going to take an action based on the resolve they gain from the rally. So they've acknowledged what it is that they need to change. They're going to engage with that, and now this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah. In the again, to use Lion King as an example, I'm picturing that slow motion shot as he's running across the desert to return. It's so archetypical of this sort of beat. All right, Act 3, we have prepare for war. So, what is the difference between this and the last beat is what I'm going to get at.
This is kind of does what it says on the tin. So they, with the previous beat, they are acting out. They're walking through the doorway into Act 3, and to prepare for war is gathering the tools.
Gotcha.
So they have made the decision and acted upon that decision, and now we're going to gather the tools. You go back to the heist thing. This is getting the crew back together.
Yep.
The montage where George Clooney's flying around the world and walking into places, and then they look up from the desk and smile at him, and he's like, "It's still on, guys."
Yep. Or it's like a survival story. It's like, well, we only got this, and this left. All right, we'll make do with it, and we're gonna make it work. And then they go off.
Yeah. And it can even be, let's pull to something else, because it can be an extended sequence. Let's go to the heist. They're going to have to visit all these different characters and pull them back into the fold. Or it can be Arnold Schwarzenegger in Commando slapping guns to himself and putting on face paint. A very, very quick montage that's literally preparing for war.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so the final battle. It's the final battle. The final battle, which I think is probably pretty obvious. This is where the main character faces off with the antagonist, the obstacle, the big threat of the story, whatever is keeping them from what they want in life, and they have a battle. Now, to somebody's point where they're talking about tragedy, this could be something that's going to end in failure if it's tragedy. That would be a way that it would be tweaked from being a more positive ending. Although not always. Sometimes tragedies it comes later. I'll get to that in a second. But that is a way that you can end in tragedy. Obviously, is after all that they've done, they still fail because ultimately they cannot overcome whatever it is that is their undoing.
Yeah, simply put, the final battle is what it is. For this beat, what happens? What's the final fight? Is it literally a punch up? Is it a courtroom face off?
Yep.
Is it a dance off? You know,
Right.
what is it?
Yeah, is
What's
it
the final
just a
battle?
conversation? Is it a yeah, what is it? Exactly. It's like what is it, the Sandlot, where they have to finally go on the other side of the fence, right? You know, like it could be very minor in terms of the stakes to the world, but to that character, this is that big thing that they've been dreading the whole time, and they have to deal with it. All right. Yeah. So this is one example where you got lots of different battles, actual battles. One though that I like to point out, and this might be a broken record for those of you who watch me, but Finding Nemo, I like how in that one the battle is just between him and his son because his son is trying to have a life and his father doesn't want him to. So ultimately, he has to lose the battle and let Nemo have his own life, which is a way to have a failure of a final battle without a tragedy. But that brings us to the one last surprise. So something occurs in this final battle that we weren't quite expecting, huh, Gareth?
Yeah, I mean, this one is technically speaking could be optional, but I always like to have it just for dramatic purposes. You want to up the game a little just at the final hurdle. You think they're winning, but the villain has a little something up their sleeve. All sorts of different possibilities again can go into this depending on your story, but it's a surprise element that just kind of blindsides your hero at the very end when it looks like victory is within grasp. What actually happens is up to you. We see a million times the killer's not really dead, or
Yep.
the that you think they're done, and then they open their vest and they've got bomb triggers in their hands, like
Right.
haha, I'm gonna blow the whole place up,
Right.
and
They're really a
anything at
robot the
all.
whole time, and you can't
Yep,
shoot
yep.
them.
It turns out they're actually a robot.
Yeah.
So it means that at this point, your hero is going to have to think quick on their feet and resolve this in some other way. So it's
Mhm.
just a quick surprise. Makes for a crowd pleasing moment.
I think this can work the other way too, though, right? Can't the one last surprise be something that the audience may have put together but haven't quite, but you're a little bit ahead of them, and it's like little tools that you built up, and so the protagonist's like, "Well, aha! Actually, I can do this," and you're like, "Oh, that's right." And I
Yes,
don't know.
well,
I
that's
feel
the
like,
smartest way to do it. Is always you want to have elements of foreshadowing going through. Plant seeds that this may be
yep,
coming, but you keep it well hidden.
yep. Thank you. I appreciate that. It is a good example. All right, so yeah, one last surprise. I can think of a few ones that are really cool. I love the Doc Brown because he has to go and put the wires together because it fails, and it's like, oh no. And then Jurassic World, that last surprise of the Mosasaurus coming out of the water, that's like classic. That was just so brilliant because you just forgot about it. You forgot that character was even there, and so the way it resolves that battle for such like a classic monster fight, it's so cool. And then Toy Story, you have a couple of little surprises. You have them have the match from Sid, and you're like, oh, they're gonna light the rocket with the match, and then they have the car go by and it blows it out. And you're like, really? And then they end up he ends up flying with Buzz, which is kind of a little surprise because they kind of built that whole up that it's he can't fly, he can only fall with style. So those are some good ones. But as you can see, these are all moments that you really remember. So do not discount, even if it is somewhat optional, doing it. Try it because these moments do land very well when they're done well. All right. Is that the end? Almost. We have the resolution. The resolution of what exactly? The resolution of the conflict, right, between the protagonist and the antagonist, but maybe more resolution as well.
Indeed, I would consider this is the resolution of the conflict between the two. So there's been the surprise. We've had that beat. Within that beat, your character's going to have to think fast, figure out some way to act. Now, a really great thing to do is that whatever it is that they think that prompts them to make that quick decision is something that they have learned and is in some way tied to the thematic element that they've been fighting throughout the whole story within themselves. So they're able to demonstrate having overcome a weakness or a flaw in finding that quick answer. Now, resolution is the beat of that action being taken. So they take that final action against the villain. This decides the final outcome. So it literally defines everything that they've learned throughout the story. This is the theme building up between your protagonist's hands in a giant fireball that they fire at the villain, and that's the final hit. It's
Yep.
over.
Sounds good. All right.
Or, well, let's go to tragedy. You back to Jeremy. Perhaps they lose.
Yeah.
Maybe they have
Right.
not. The one thing, if they do lose, that you want to make sure that is being shown here again, engaging with the theme, is that the character has not fully engaged with or corrected these thematic flaws within themselves that would have allowed them to win if they
Right.
had. Good examples of this. Again, I'm always beating the drum for Pet Cemetery, where Lewis Creed destroys, bottles it all. He's too
Yeah.
consumed by his grief. He does not
Right.
fix it. Or you can have other elements. One thing that I've written as well is the characters find out they're actually being manipulated by the villain all along and are a villain themselves in what they've done
Mhm.
because they have flaws again that they didn't fix. Being too headstrong, trusting people too much, whatever it is that they did not resolve throughout the story, even though they tried, led to a tragic end.
Yeah. Ender's Game is a good example of that. Complete manipulation. But another thing I can think of too is that when you think of tragedy making it work, I think for those beats, to your point, you gotta foreshadow the failure. I feel like where tragedies will sometimes get annoying or not pleasing to the audience is if you're just rolling along and then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I just decided that this was a bad ending for the character. Ha. And you're like, really? I think it's better if it's like you can watch them. It's almost like Jenga. You can watch them move the pieces and you're like, oh, it's gonna fall. Oh, not quite. Oh, it's gonna fall. Not quite. And then eventually the whole thing comes toppling down and you saw it coming and you couldn't look away. It was like a train wreck. But I think that's when tragedy works a lot better.
Yeah, you have to be able to see through these beats as you're going through the story that they're not doing the right things.
Right.
It should be trackable all the way through, so there's always a sense that this is going downhill.
Right. And you can't look away, but it's not going to go the way it should. All right, so we're getting to the denouement. Fancy French terms now, Gareth.
Capital T, capital E, the end. So your beat there for the denouement is the final image. Really, what you want to wrap up in that again, because you've only got a couple of sentences here, is just a final image that shows the all new state of the world. For your protagonist. When we say state of the world, of course, that means internally. It can mean externally. It can mean both. The physical world can be changed or it cannot. It can be their internal worlds. But we get a sense in this little final moment of what's happened, the arc.
Yep. Yeah, no, perfect. Yeah, makes that makes perfect sense. This is just a way to kind of button up a few things, give a sense of the consequences of the actions of the story to both the character and to the world at large, which leads us to a potential epilogue. Now, considering it says optional, why do you think you would have an epilogue versus not having an epilogue?
Me, honestly, I'm just not a fan of them at all. I think just wrap up the story and get out. Epilogues can be useful if you're in a series. If you want to set
Mm,
up a little bit of a separate um, seed for what's going to come next. I think they're
yeah.
great for that. Really, really nice for a hook. But it's really if you need a little bit of additional detail to fill in that arc, maybe once the main story is complete, perhaps what has happened in the resolution and if your denouement is very closely tied to the resolution, you might need an epilogue to really drive home the thematic change in the character. Perhaps it needs to be a week later before we can fully see the genesis of the change. Maybe. So an epilogue would work for that. But I think the vast majority of stories don't need one. They're going to end naturally with the denouement. So it is marked as optional as you're completing your sheets. Don't feel like you need to, but again, if circumstances demand it and it kind of has to be there, well, put it in. We'll see if it's
Yep.
convincing.
Yep. Yeah, I feel like no matter what, it's a well. I guess not no matter what, but in a lot of genres, I think it's nice, specifically like fantasy or sci-fi, to leave the audiences a little bit of a taste of what might come next because people who read those genres love to live in the world, and so to give them a little bit of think about, it's like, oh, and by the way, the consequences of the story mean this. Did you think about that? And just leave it. That can be really nice without having to set up a whole series. But yeah, in general, I don't find even epilogues for series to be super rewarding a lot of the time. I feel like, if the consequences of the actions are so fascinating that I'm interested to what will happen next, I kind of just want you to stop there and then just let me go, rather than kind of be like a scene where characters are sitting around being like, I wonder what's going to happen next. I don't know. What do you think? Like, those could be so annoying. I think like Catching Fire from the Hunger Games is such a good job because it sets up the consequences of that book and then just stops. And you're like, well, yeah, now I'm interested to know what happens next. Uh,
Yeah, exactly.
so even in those situations, I'm kind of with you, Gareth. I would say even though it's optional, I would say try to put that more in the denouement. Somebody said denouement opposite of opening image. Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. From film, I'm thinking of the Lion King, just because that's a great example for archetypical beats. Because literally, it is the same as the opening image. It starts with the birth of Simba and it ends with the birth of Simba's daughter. You have that really clear symmetry. It doesn't necessarily have to be that on the nose. Great, like I said, that has a very myth-like structure. It's feeling very classic, but it tells you how you can make a nice symmetry and mirror image of your opening scene for sure.
However, do keep in mind the flexibility as well, because while all of this is structural and kind of guidance, an easy way to piece things together, it's not a box that you should feel stuck in.
Nope.
Something like denouement being is not essentially the opposite of the opening image. That's not
No,
an
that's a good
essential
point.
part of a story, because tragedy could be even worse, or it could be tragic in the sense that the character starts in one place and ends up right back there again. That's part of
Yep.
the tragedy.
Yep.
So
That's
it could
true.
be exactly the same.
No. That's a good point. Actually, ending a story in exactly the same spot could be very effective. I'm trying to think. I think there's something. I can't think of something. I know I've seen that device used.
Often, sometimes if it does end like that, it's either they're back in that spot, but they are personally happier because of what's been resolved throughout the story. It's like the world is different for them, but they're in the same place they were before. So okay, it's okay. It's not the same exactly, but it's technically the same. And but often, if I see them in exactly the same position that they were in, it's often worse, because that tends to be a tragic end, where things does not change. Position does not change really all that much.
All right. So
So
you
for
want to take a
this,
moment, Gareth, and look at a beat sheet?
yes, I think because we're hitting time here, so we'll run through
Yep.
mine if you want to. I'll show
Sounds
some
good.
things that I put in, and some of the things that I'm currently not happy with. I'll tell you why, to chain it through, so that you can see an example for everybody here to follow as part of the challenge.
And
I
I
will not be
haven't.
entering the challenge. I can't win. Don't worry.
I haven't seen this yet either, so I get to like do a little on-air analysis. This is fun.
No, I just have to figure out how to full
There
screen it.
we are.
There we go. Right. So this is something I've just popped together from an idea that I've had swinging around in my head for a few years, of a ghost story, and I thought yesterday I'll pop it in. So this is very quick, very quick run through of what happens here. And sorry for some of the gruesome ideas here if you're easily spooked, but
Yeah,
opening
for those of
image.
you who are new to things, Gareth is our horror expert. So.
So with an opening image, and we're going to set the mood here. So of course it's going to be grim. We're at the seaside with the family. Their child Lucas drowns in the water. When the father picks him up, the corpse awakens. It turns out it's a nightmare. Now the father Cole wakes up from the nightmare. But
Okay.
from the very beginning, we know what we're in for. This is a horror story. A glimpse at theme. So that morning, we introduced to the family. We have the father Cole, the mother Kate, the kid Jacob, and they're all sitting around. Obviously not just sitting around, because that's not good storytelling, but they're doing things. Cole sets off to a therapy session to talk about the death of their child. So here we're looking at the theme of the story, which of course is going to be about fatherhood and grief. Again, probably just inkling a little bit into my love for Pet Cemetery here, and broaching the same kind of topics.
Yeah.
But we see here that,
Obviously, the therapist will probably be telling the father something that he needs to do, and whether that's
yes,
going to do it or not will remain to be seen.
exactly. So there's a discussion there, and a hint of what is going on with him that he needs to fix. At the same time, they are moving into a new house. So we're setting up a status quo, which is a new status quo for them. So they move into the new house. It's supposed to be a new beginning. They're settling in, and we have visions of Jacob the child playing happily in the yard and around the house. Now, what is actually involved in there as well, there's no space for it, but I can just put it in there. Jacob plays happily that he seems to be playing with children that are not there. moving into the inciting incident, Jacob at the dinner table mentions the woman and says that the other kids are scared of her, and then references his brother, which, with refusal of the call, sets off Cole because he is not handling the grief well. Does not want them to talk about the dead child and throws himself into work and further therapy. Now, I've noticed here a glimpse lair entrance because I'm still piecing together the story for myself. And one of the things that we need to find and see throughout any of these beats too is something unique about the story. Because as we're going through, this could be any ghost story in the world about a ghost woman who's perhaps after children. So there's got to be something unique about it. And I'll try to work that in there. You'll see later on, my mind is drawing me towards something of her corpse being entwined with the land and in control of vegetation and all sorts around the local area. So Cole catches a glimpse of the entrance to this is a bit of foreshadowing. So he will see the entrance to the lair at some point. So that's where she is. That's where they're going to ultimately need to go. But he doesn't know that at the time. The quest into the new world, they're forced into it. So the refusal is just him blowing up, saying, I don't want to hear any of this stuff. However, he then sees the dead child himself. His wife is scared by sort of spooky events, and they're forced to accept that something is wrong in the house. So we're questing into the new world here. They're going to have to deal with this break in the status quo. With the B story, we then introduce a secondary character, Jack, who's arrived to renovate the house. However, there's something odd about him. He seems too familiar with the property. He makes excuses that he knows why he knows his way around. All these houses are built the same, but he's not. We're giving him a side eye at this point.
This is a good example. I just want to interrupt you for a second. Often, like I said, the second act, the character moves from location. However, horror is an example where that doesn't happen as often. Often, it's a re-look at the same location. So now the same location is viewed with different lens. So it's like a new location. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah. And you'll often find a lot of these things in horror as well. Horror gets deeply emotional by its very nature. It needs to, because the one of the things that will happen in a lot of haunted house stories too is I am not moving because this is my house. This is my life. This is everything I have worked for and the culmination of my efforts, and you won't take it from me, which is more emotional, more of an emotional response than a logical one. And of course, you get punished for it. Now, challenges might. Cole begins suffering debilitating deeper hallucinations. Meanwhile, the ghost kids are constantly scaring kids. So there's lots of things going on there. We get our series of horror set pieces as the challenges. Now, the challenge at this point still is staying in the house. Going back to what I said about the emotional aspect of things, Cole is in no emotional state to be moving house again or even dealing with the fact that this has all gone so wrong. So it's a really, really rough time for them. When we get to the midpoint and raise the stakes, of course, something's going to have to be done. You can't just sit around and cry all the time. So Cole confronts the estate agent. The estate agent reveals to them that once you're in there, you never get out, that it follows you, and then they blow their own head off in front of him. So again, that's just pushing him right down into the pits and sets up something later on that you can't get away. So there's running is not an option. I need to work that again, massage that in a little more. But when we get to the villain adds pressure, this is where the woman actually makes herself known. Yes, she's real. She's actually an entity and attacks them and tries to take Jacob. So we see here that yes, what she is trying to do is take Jacob. It's not just a haunted house with kids, freaking people out. So they actually flee the house. Now, meanwhile, at the same time, Kate is looking into the history of this place and discovers that Jack is actually the father from a previous family who has recently been released from prison for the murders of the family. And now he's in their house. So at the same time, she is in a different location. I want her to be involved in a side story so she's not sidelined entirely. She's an intrinsic member of this family. And I want her to be active in trying to figure out what it is. But to make this happen, I need to separate them as well. And when we get to the disaster is Jack actually takes Jacob back to the house. So after Kate discovers who Jack is, she rushes back, but Jack has already found them and taken Jacob. So at this point, we're thinking Jack is actually part of it, that he's in lieu with the woman in some way or has done something awful and led to it and is going to feed the kid to her. The disaster actually happens here because they interrupt him in the middle of what he's trying to do to actually stop the woman, and the child gets taken. So it all goes wrong. at that point. Now it's doubly wrong as well because Jack has the wrong idea. He does not know where she is entirely. He thinks that he's got the wrong location in the house, so it's not going to work anyway. But they only find that out afterwards. With the despair and rally, Cole breaks down. Jack rallies him as we reveal Jack's real motivations. He's there to stop her. He was simply the only option he felt he had was to use Jacob because he knows that she takes children as bait because he thought he knew he could finish it, but he was wrong. It all went wrong for that reason. With the power of resolve, they pull around, look more into the history of the woman, so we have that information. Jack couldn't find her remains before he was sentenced. That's the problem. He didn't do it. He was wrongly imprisoned, but now he, in the middle of, has been doing research and come back and want to finish it. But of course, he doesn't know everything. Now, moving into Act 3, we have Jack's research revealed. He thinks he knows where to find her, but Cole then recalls that he knows the entrance. He's found it, that thing that he saw before, so we can call back on the foreshadowing. The final battle, they enter the lair. It's filled with the woman's bones are there, obviously, and the bones of many, many children. As they enter and come in, she actually seals the area with control of these kind of tendrils that lock them in there. And a vision of the dead child then taunts Cole, tries to destroy him emotionally, but he burns her corpse. For the one last surprise, the corpse animates, starts coming off the wall with tendrils and weeds and reeds and everything coming at them. And at the same time, while it's burning, Jacob is actually inside there. He's not dead. He's not gone. He's alive and inside, but he's been held asleep, basically, detached from reality. He wakes and screams up from within the flames. So now things are really, really bad. They're going to burn their own child to death in an effort to stop her. For the resolution, the action that has to be taken, Jack holds the corpse back, which is burning him fatally. Meanwhile, Cole is able to cover himself up and climb into the flames to save his son and pull him out of there. In the denouement, Jack dies, seeing his wife and child as ghosts for the last time. The family, just abbreviated CKJ, escapes from the lair. Cole almost dies and has a vision of his dead son, but he comes back. Part of the things that I wanted to talk about on this were some ideas, because at the end I thought, okay, well, this guy's crawling through flames to pull the child out. There's every likelihood that he's going to be fatally injured as well. So when we pull him, when we get everybody outside of the burning lair and they're lying there in the grass and all the smoke is coming up, it would be an emotional moment for him to actually die. It would easily catch you emotionally as this man who's struggled eventually succumbs to it, and perhaps be kind of cheap and have him see the dead child beckoning to him and they leave together and all of that soppy stuff. But that doesn't resolve the thematic arc for him. In fact, what it's really about is that he needs to overcome this grief that's tearing the family apart and quite literally go through flames to save the remaining son, to be there for him. Right. And if he does not do that, all is lost. Right. And if he dies at the end because of doing that, well, then he's leaving his son alone again, so it doesn't work thematically. It gives him a way out. It's just an out for him. So the responsibility is not there. So I'm still working on that, and of course, massaging more of the uniqueness in here, because at the moment it's kind of it's getting towards a bit of a mix of, I guess, the Guardian and Sinister. But there needs to be more earlier hearkening to the vegetation side of things and all of that, what's actually going on with the woman and who she is. But that's all in the backstory there. So it needs seeded a little more. But yeah, you can see how essentially the arc and the theme and what it is talking about is that, yes, if this main character allows the grief to eat him, it's going to tear his family apart, quite literally. And then, of course, the literary metaphor of the whole going through fire and re-emerging to save somebody. So it's his own personal challenge that he has to overcome. So that's the beats really in this one for me. I'll probably continue to work on it and massage it out a little more and see if something comes out of it. But certainly, while it's solid enough as a storyline, it's not there yet. So we'd like to see in your own story beats, you plan it out like this and get the flow going, but really think about thematically how it ties together and how these individual things, for example, Jack's story is strong enough, but I need a stronger idea going through here as to what's going on with Kate, because she's only popping up here in the middle of that bee thing with not much else going on. So even in my own mind, I know that her thread can be strong, but that's not apparent on the sheet. which is the challenging thing, hence the challenge. So you really want to knuckle down over the next 2 weeks and fill in your sheet too, so that you have things like that. So somebody who's looking at this sheet with no context to the rest of your story can actually get that idea that, okay,
Yep.
yeah, this is a strong character who's still at the center of things. So I hope that's helpful.
I think that's very helpful to get to see it actually used and in person, and I think that's it's also cool just to see how you would use it for development. But like I said, there are going to be people that use it in order to plan out a story before they write it. But it could be perhaps that you would want to write a story and then use it afterwards. But uh, and use it for your story edits. So getting used to this format could be a very helpful tool for you. And it's a great challenge just to try because you may find there are certain elements of it that work really well for you as well.
Oh, quick question, Lisa. Yeah, now that you mentioned that, I just saw that typo. Yeah, he sees the dead son, Lucas. That's a holdover from him dying and going with him because I want to have a little bit of that dramatic sense of is he going to leave? Because that adds again to his thematic turn. Is that it would be easy for him to go because he is burned and injured, but he's not going to. He doesn't choose to. It's the dead is dead. It's gone. He has to stay for his
Here's
son.
a here's another question. What if you have more than two or three B stories? I would say that generally speaking, while you can have multiple subplots, especially in a much longer work or a much more complex work, that there's usually only one that's really mattering that closely to the main protagonist and antagonist conflict. I'm not saying it's impossible, but that does speak to perhaps, if you were to do that, you might develop actually just another round of beat sheets and you would just beat that out and have it as a separate document for sure. That's also what you might do for different viewpoints because a lot of times this sort of format is done more for like film, which is generally not a ton of viewpoints, but for novels, I would imagine if somebody wanted to beat sheet something like Game of Thrones, you would literally need different beat sheets because you just would not be able to put it together. It's just too complex in terms of those different viewpoint characters.
Yeah, a little parting tip I would say if you are planning to, it's not necessarily tied to this challenge, so we won't ask you to do this, but if you are thinking of moving ahead with using beat sheets to plan a lot of your stories too, is I always recommend doing one story beat sheet so you know how the plot is moving, but also do character beat sheets that align with that. So you have each of those plot scenes next to you, and you're marking on your character beat sheet what's happening with the character, emotionally, personally, at each of those plot points, so you can tell whether their arc is solid, what's changing, what's going on, because all of that's not going to show on one single plot beat sheet. You want to
Yeah.
have multiple to do that, but that's a really good way of keeping track of your characters too, and making sure that they're changing and evolving.
Yep.
Alrighty, are we finished?
I think so. So do you want to flash that link on there one more time if you have it?
There
There
we
it
go.
is. So yes, so there it is down below. Drop the beat challenge. Yes, and you can sign up, and you will have access to the same exact sheet that Gareth was just using, and you could start playing with it, start working on it. We will give you more details on how to submit for the challenge and all of that a little bit later. So stay tuned to this channel. Make sure you have subscribed, ring the bell, comment below about different strategies that you have for these different beats for sure. And I'm really, really looking forward to reading this because I've seen so many different. I've seen authors, do first chapters and stories. I'm really curious to see authors do beat sheets because I just think it'll be interesting to see what it is. I'm really hoping
Yeah,
we get a lot of entries and we can look at a lot of different stories because I think it'll be
it's
a
good
lot of
fun.
fun.
For everybody that's registered and everybody here, we will drop in with you again around the midpoint, and we'll drop in again, of course, towards the end to do our prize draw and everything. So again, visit the link you see on your screen here if you have not yet registered, because you will need to be to win a
Yes,
prize. But for now,
yes.
go beat those sheets, and we'll see what you come up with. If you're in Mighty Networks, if you're an AutoCrit Pro member and you're in there, feel free to discuss anything you're working on, share, break it down, whatever you need. We're around to help too. So get to it.
All
While,
right.
while
Well,
Daniel air drums.
I know. I was like, I'm feeling the beat. All right, we'll see you around. In the meantime, get back to writing. Okay, everybody. Have a great day.
Take care. Bye bye.